Welcome everybody to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering diverse and often conflicting schools of thought. Consequently, we are not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. I'm David Miller, the Secretary of the Existentialist Society. Now, our guest speaker today is Richard Volpato, and his topic is Renovating the Analytics of Rights, Commodities and Satisfactions. Richard, over to you.
Thanks, David. This is a analytical approach at a set of issues. Thank you for being in the meeting. I need audiences that I don't necessarily know personally, but I respect because they clearly have an interest in thinking and expanding their minds and reviewing our situation locally, globally, etc. So it's very therapeutic for me to go through what is essentially a draft of an idea. And what happens is after I've finished it, the mere presence of the fact that I've spoken to people that are witnessing on the fly unleashes a whole series of self-reflecting criticisms, critiques, etc. And lo and behold, the whole line of thinking typically gets a lot better as a result of me internalizing your presence as a collective critic of what I'm trying to do. In terms of my background, most recently I've been working in the field of what you might call residential resilience. I'm from Italy originally and migrated here in the 50s. I've did uni, worked at Aboriginal Affairs when it first started. In fact, I was the guy in charge of the NACC, which was a Aboriginal body, representative body of 41 electorates with elections, candidates, winners, and they met in hotels and deliberated on where Aboriginal policy should go. And it was a voice back then, but alas, it disappeared. Anyway, partly for that, I then drifted back into university and did an honours year, and that got me a scholarship to Cambridge, partly because of some ideas that I experimented with then, some of which I've never quite resolved ever since. And so it keeps coming back in various ways. How I'm coming back, I've been in academia, state and local governments, federal consulting, but I have taught a lot of students. So around about 2,500 over 15, 18 years. And many of those have then gone off and done interesting things, set up businesses. I'm sort of like now some of them, there's about 50 of them here in Melbourne, have children the age that they had parents were when I taught them. So life goes on. But anyway, as a result, I feed off a lot of interaction, particularly intellectual stuff, and I'm deeply disquieted about the nature of the situation we find ourselves these days, but I make a vow never to sort of just get into the critique or assuming I know what the answer is, but I do like experimenting with various little initiatives, of which some of these you'll see in a minute. The approach is analytical in that I'm using different distinctions to clarify a field. As a result of that, it may look a bit technical, but feel free to, particularly at the end, to ask me to exemplify the material. I'll give a couple of examples, but I'm also concerned to see if this thing flies. So let's start. So I've switched from satisfactions to dissatisfaction because that's the more interesting problem. And so by talking about rights, commodities, and satisfactions, I want to sort of think what we get wrong about rights. I want to talk about why a commodity is hardly ever commodious. And finally, how does unhappiness spread? A good starting point here is Helia Belloc wrote a book called The Servile State. This book here in 1911, full of both critique and optimism, thought that capitalism and socialism was producing what he thought of as the servile state, which also created a servile state of mind, where the state, whether it's through democracy and high concentration of ownership of capitalism, or socialism, where the state controls the welfare of the citizens. Either way, he thought citizens end up wanting security, comforts, and free speech, or their own view of the world to be respected. And these have led to a proliferation of rights, polymorphic forms of commodity that disturb and distort how pricing and markets operate, and stressed social interactions beckoning for ever more support in the form of mostly therapy, understanding, and so on. So this tries to work out some strategies to counter this form of servility from within the discourses that encourage it. There's a separate line of work, which I've given a talk previously on social renovation, which is my approach to the opposite, which essentially is how to create resilience rather than how to drain out servility. So this is about draining servility out rather than generating resilience, but we'll do that another time. Anyway, if we look at rights, you can sort of start from the beginning of once, God was a feared entity, and with secularization instead, following Hobbes's Leviathan, it's the sovereign that makes laws framed to frighten the unjust. Like if you're a virtuous person, you've got nothing to fear. But if you're wayward, the mighty sword of justice will come upon you. In design, and so the issue here is what I want to explore is how to design laws. But the critical thing here is how to actually talk about law. And one of the problems has been the language of rights ends up creating many different nuances, and then people write of them, they write them into rules, constitutions, laws, body corporate laws that I deal a lot with. And this word right ends up stretching in all sorts of different directions. Now, a particular guy called Hoffeld in 1913, who was a chemist, but then became a jurist, wrote a thing called the Dual Relations of Rights. And what he did was separate 8 different notions of right. And he did it in a way to think about, he doesn't say this is me inferring something, but if you're going to write laws in a secular context, what you really want to do, and this is the 3 words in bold, you want to maximize autonomy within a sphere of life, e.g. residence, contracts, wherever, while defining thresholds of compliance flexibly, i.e. with which are appropriate to setting. So if you think of autonomy, compliance, and flexibility opening up a space for where you can design law, you end up with these 8 forms of rights in a way, except, well, one is no right, but the others have various meanings that people use to mean a right. Now, a right proper is something that gives autonomy, has a flexibility built into it, and has a mechanism for compliance. The important thing about a right is that it requires a duty to be performed. So if you have a right to privacy, it means it's obliged by people not interrupting that privacy. If you have a right to divorce, it means someone has to oblige that by sort of realizing you don't have a choice here. You have to oblige through a duty. Rights themselves come from powers, and powers in turn can disable a certain law, producing an immunity. So you can have a situation where someone might say, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not dealing with this speeding ticket. Why? Because I'm driving an emergency vehicle. I have immunity from this sort of thing. Get out of my way. So that looks and feels like a right, but it's actually an immunity. And the immunity involves disabling a power. The power that be, e.g. the policeman, cannot enforce because there's an immunity that thwarts it. Ditto, a right, as I said, involves a duty. A power generates liabilities. It could be a liability as in like a tax or a fine, but you can have negative liabilities as in like an incentive. So that's the state operating. Privilege, however, is sort of a interesting, and it's the slipperiest of the categories because it's almost like a carryover. A privilege does not require anything of anyone else. It just is. So if you have, to use the historical example, if you have a lord of the manor who decides that Jones the cook is such a decent chap, he should be allowed to grow some extra crops and take extra wine from the cellar back to his own house for the duration of his life. And that's a privilege. It's revocable. The Lord of the Manor can say, sorry, I've changed my mind. You double-crossed me the other day. The privilege is now gone. Now, interestingly, in the modern language, the language of privilege reappears under the language of license. And you get some very interesting licensing issues because a license is a revocable at the pleasure of someone. You can do it, but under certain conditions. But no one else can do anything with it. It's yours to use, but it's bequeathed to you by some other entity. Now, in the apartment building area in Melbourne especially, it's amazing how many licenses carve out bits of common property, the back of stairwells, it goes on and on. And the formulation of it is written as if it's a right. And you talk to agents and say, oh, it's like a lease, 99-year lease, when it's not. And so there's all sorts of confusion. So part of this process is to try and clarify exactly what nuances are involved. So if you go to the next step here, you can actually see that that crossover of three domains of designing law actually opens up into a cube of logic, actually. So the top of the thing is all the forms of what seem like rights, but there's a right proper, which if you look, and the vertical lines define the analog that's there to make it happen. So a right presupposes a duty. A power presupposes an ability to create a liability. An immunity presupposes a disability. Okay, and the privilege.
Excuse me,
Yep.
Richard. Screen sharing. Had you intended to screen share as yet?
Oh, sorry, am I? Such is the value of narcissism. I was going fine. Where do I? That was at the. Where is it? So where do I do this?
Share screen on the share on the green button.
Share on the green button. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Oops. Okay. We now have this share screen.
Yes, renovating rights.
Okay, so start at the beginning again. Okay, that's what it started like. And this is what I just mentioned, Belloc. Here are the intersecting circles that how to design law. And here is the interesting facet here that these intersecting circles actually define a logical cube. So if you look up rights and cube, just those two words in Google, and if you use the name of the author, Hoffeld, Hofeld, Hoffeld, you'll come up with lots of articles that do lots of jurisprudential, logical, semantic analysis of these cubes. They're becoming quite gripping now that you've got AI coming along the scene. And one of the points about this is that in Australia, because of the fact that we've been a colony, the way constitutions, administrative law, arrangements often involve copy, paste, modify, put in an exception, allow for an escape clause. And it's a ragtaggle of different things, which if you've been working with it for 20 years, you really understand what it all means. But as a matter of logic, it's quite scrappy. Oddly enough, people are feeding this sort of stuff into AI things, which generates a space of logic pseudo logic based on all the word co-occurrences and so on. It can produce inferential things, but you're feeding it a very wobbly form of legal writing. So with this cube, there's actually a form of logical regimentation, which if the AI engine understands this is the space you can operate in, check it out as to where you use may, might, should, must, and so on, are cues to these sorts of terms in this cube of the world of rights. And it's already happening. People are just feeding, let's put all our electrical contracts in or strata management thing and go in and you get stuff and it starts feeding stuff back, but it's not cunning. It's not cunning. You can't second guess what you're really trying to do with the thing you're writing because you're not working with the struts of logic that this cube gives. So there's a lot there in the literature, and some of it's quite accessible, some of it gets really arcane. But anyway, that's the thing. And by the way, the cross diagonals constitute contradictions. So rights coming down to no rights is a contradiction, power to disability is a contradiction, immunity to liability is a contradiction, and duty to privilege are opposites as well. So it's a regimented form. So, so the question here of renovating rights becomes a venture of simultaneously reworking written documents with a view to re-regimenting it with this cube and then feeding it into AI, and with it understanding this cube, you get something better. So, for example, before I go to commodities, in the strata management area, you've got all kinds of multiple parties. There's an owner, a tenant, an onlooker, a contractor, a problem, the strata manager, the local council, utility authority. And the way they interact is defined pretty much on Melburnian goodwill. Like, tell me what your problem is. Then people get a bit agitated. Is the contractor doing the right thing? How can I trust him? We'll get to that later. But the important thing is the actual source documents of what constitutes a body corporate are lacking the kind of detail here. So a good example that I hinted before is the construction of licenses. So if you think for a minute that there are areas of buildings that are not used, for example, attics, basements, car parks, gardens, which are sort of given as common, there are ways in which you can sort of carve things off under all sorts of circumstances. To give you a simple example, to introduce the issue of commodities in a minute, is supposing someone there's a blank area that has happened in one of the buildings I was with. There was a sort of funnel, like a garage area. It was closed off. And a guy there was there as a tenant and wanted permission to sort of build surfboards in this thing because he was just using this stuff. And so with ventilation, okay, you do that, but then maybe the rent goes up a bit. But the interesting thing was the income he was making from that more than covered the cost he had then to pay for GoGet. So he got rid of his car, and the GoGet meant that he could rent his car and the van. And so a funny little upshot of a business was creeping inside a residential form very discreetly and cleanly, but it required really careful issues with insurance, licensing, easements, blocking in car parks and so on. In Italy, by contrast, this is rife. I mean, I've got cousins that set up all sorts of things so that you get a level of communal living and productivity and supports that are far in excess of what we imagine mateship delivers here. But we'll get to that later. But anyway, that's a matter of rights. With commodities, you get a funny thing here because, again, you get another 8 elements of commodities. People tend to think of a commodity as something I can buy and sell. But actually, and in economic literature, there's the issue of, well, wait a minute, is the commodity rival or not. So, for example, a private good is rival, meaning that others might be chasing after the same thing. So prices might rise if it's going scarce. Whereas non-rival, for example, the air we breathe, however many more people are breathing it, is not cutting out your slice of that air. And then commons are the same, which is like the Murray. It's rival because if we all go and use it, it goes empty. But on the other hand, it's not excludable. You can't fence it off. And similarly, club goods are the opposite, where you can fence it off, but it's not rival because it's a club. Now, interestingly enough, that's the physical presence of commodities, but they actually present themselves through another way. So, for instance, a private good presents itself as a search good, what's known as a search good. And by the way, if you type in any of these words into Google, you'll get Wikipedia and other many articles on these different things. The first lot of club, commons, public, and private is a very well trodden area. The other four, experience, search, credence, and merit, is a little newer, but it's firing away, particularly with the internet. So with private goods, you think, well, which razor do I buy, or which car do I buy, or headphones? You go online, you search. You want to be able to compare facets, price, delivery times, warranties, blah, 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 rank them and find your best deal, and you buy that good. But if it's a club good, like a restaurant, how do you assess it? You could look at reviews, but are they correct? Maybe the restaurant owner, maybe an upset person has written a bad review. The only way you can really tell is go and experience it. So it's called an experience good then. So club goods present themselves authentically as experiences. Oh, wow, this cafe is fantastic. I'll recommend it to my friends who believe in me. And I know what to say about it, the ambience, the music, the service, the quality of the food, the Turkish vibe, blah. Common goods, by contrast, you can't quite experience them. What you've got to do is believe in their value. So the Murray-Darling thing, or Hydro 2.0, this is a commons good where you think, hey, this is worth doing. All the players need to believe in it. So you have a credence good here. You can't sort of shake it down and say, well, what's in it for me? You got to think big picture. This is just, and you can criticize it, by the way. It's not to say on believing in it, you look carefully, think, well, wait a minute, this isn't going to work for the following reasons of leakage, contamination, other reasons why the common good is not as good as it seems, for example. But the point is that the engagement with the common good comes through credence. And finally, with public goods, this is like the roadways, the air, forests, the downtown city area, for example, can be seen as a public good. The train system, if it is a public good. The question there is, you can't exclude people, right? Because they just, unless you put meters on, gates on it. But typically, the public good is non-excludable. It's non-rival, but you call it a good because it does good things. That's why it appears in what's sometimes called a merit good. So a merit good is something that's good for society. A demerit good is something that's bad for society. So crime is a demerit good, for which then you get a public good called the police. And for example, shade is a merit good, and a public good is trees. The interesting thing is you get odd cases like, for example, education is a merit good, but does it have to be a public good? So here's an interesting twist as to how you start playing with these commodities. Is, for example, private education, fine, you pay the money for private education, good. However, if you go to private school and say, can you give me not just how much I paid you, but how much you've got in the way of subsidies to subsidize the teaching of my child, they won't give that to you because it's all lost in capital works and all sorts of other things. And you say, okay, you've got swimming pools, you've got this, you've got that. They stay closed at the weekend, say. You can actually try and cross the roads in Chirac, and there's all these private schools with their grounds closed. You have to walk right around them, not through them, because they're locked. You say, well, wait a minute, if you've got a merit good, albeit privatised, why can't it be made available to others than just the students, e.g. the football fields? And insofar as you do, your subsidy is then enhanced. If you don't do it, well, we'll subtract the subsidy to the value of what this public good access might otherwise be. This could change, this is the sort of way you start working with these commodities. But on top of this description, the commodities also have corporate can play with this. So with the internet, you start off with a private good like a movie, and then you get told, get a subscription, go to Stan, get a subscription, which is a club good. Then you pay a subscription. So now you don't know how much you're paying per film. You think, well, since I've got the subscription, I might as well pick out. And so the subscription service, which is a club good, is giving you an experience that's continuous, but it's not nefarious, but it's a bit ominous in the sense that it's working off what you've engaged. So it starts to filter the playlist to you, as it were, sending you down a particular funnel that maximizes your attention, so that advertising for others watching that film can be worked out by how much you're watching it, and you get to see it and find some satisfaction. But the problem is the browsability of all the range of, say, films is curtailed. And so you're getting a kind of quarantined part of the culture. So there's sort of issues on that front as well. Again, as with the rights, the same thing here. You get a square which has got a logical thing. So between production and consumption of commodities, producers can alter how they exist in the life of the customer. Is the consumer? Is the consumer a customer, a member, a patron, or a resident? Each having its own lifespan. So you get all sorts of cunning maneuvers where, for example, as I mentioned with the public good, is justified by merit good, but there are lots of other merit goods that are privatized. And you ask, well, why are they privatized? Oh, because of the quality. And you say, but is the facility always being used with the quality, or is it just lying idle because the quality is so sparse? You also get demerit arguments too. So, for example, in Caracas, say, you might be at a private school, but as part of the social license, which is to get the merit side of things at play, the kids might take on board teaching violin lessons to some of the poor kids that live down the road from the said private school. Instead, in Australia, I haven't found this in Australia. There must be examples, but I've seen notoriously opposite examples where you've got the private school, the kids drive to school when they're old enough to have a car, they park in the street. Somehow mysteriously they don't get tickets. Teachers do too. So in one school, I think I counted nearly 102 cars filling up the street. The result of that is that poor older people coming out of an apartment block drive their little car off to Aldi's to get their shopping done, which they do only once a fortnight, and they carry a whole load back, but that's okay. They park outside the apartment, take it upstairs. Alas, they come back, student or teacher's taken up the spot. They have to drive around and around. And so a kilometre away from the apartment, since they've got perishable goods, the little old lady parks her car finally and struggles all the way up the street, right past the playground of the students. They're all sitting there watching phones, throwing footballs, having fun. And the poor lady walks by. You can imagine the filmic scene with the right musical background. Here's what private education's delivered to this lady. Sweat and tears. Now, you can film it, and the other thing you can do, and this is an example of the countervailing logic, which you can see where I'm coming from. You can also drive up the middle of the road on a tricycle with photo cameras on either side and photograph all the number plates of all the cars all the way around the streets around the school. Then you can come back 2 hours later and do it again, and then again and again. And so by 3 o'clock, you've actually got possibly 25 cars that have been over 6 hours in the parking spot, not got a fine. So you print out their things, stick it on the windscreen and say, this is what you've been doing. No fine, but we'll report it to the council anyway. And you go to the council saying, why aren't you ever policing this during term time? And so you can sort of dig out all sorts of little twists and turns that are lurking underneath the veneer of how these goods present themselves when there's something else going on, which is a bigger sociological problem. But for me, clarifying these goods gives me a framework to sort of test their authenticity, their validity, even their justice, even though sometimes they're framed as if that's what they're doing. Now, this is the one that gets particularly complicated because the other two, insofar as they go wrong, and you saw a bit, if I started doing that, I haven't because I lie low, but I might incite others to do it, is if some of these things happen and you start creating stresses, people start going into these stress modes. Now, a piece of writing, which I've got to show because it's a weird little thing. This book, The Social System, written by someone called Talcott Parsons, who was a very clever and institutionally central figure in American sociology in the 50s and 60s, and then came unstuck with Marxism and so on in the 70s. And he was a pompous and a very analytical guy. But in that book, he's one of the few that's actually tried to define how social stresses form, as it were, stressed interactions. Now, one of the problems we have in Australia is particularly good at, or pathological at this, which is when you get the stresses, people personalize it. You need a therapist. You need a diet. You need to go into find stoicism. Chill out. It's your challenge. You can't change the world, but you can change you. And so it smudges itself into maladies and phobias and whatever, while another lot of people go away happily not thinking there's causing any problems. So when you do start getting a problem of an interaction, so for example, if I'm too opaque, that's going to start problems. People might leave. People might say, could you just repeat that? You'll start having reactions. Now, rather than personalize, you might say, well, Richard, could you just try a bit better to speak clearly, say? So in this case here, you have 8 forms of stress. One thing you can do if you're interacting with another person, they're not reciprocating properly, you can force the issue. You can say, look, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, I'm not going to continue this conversation. And you bring them into line so they follow you because of the force it might be very gentle. It might be a very English, fine, mild rebuke. Yes, okay, yes. So force and follow are a little dyad there. But the other thing you can do, instead of focusing on the person that's causing you the thing, you focus on the norm that brings you and the person together. So you're dealing with a doctor and he's trying to rush things up. And you say, bloody hell, these medical centres, they've got you under the tight leash. You've got to kick me out now. And so you fixate on the norms that are applying to the encounter, a medical centre, a marriage, a father-child interaction, commuter, bus driver, passenger, fellow passenger. There's all these dyadic forms, and they usually have norms that are sort of provide the buoyancy and the framework within which you interact. And so those norms feed back into those rights. But the point is, when it goes wrong, you either force the issue and go follow, or you fixate on the norms. And if you're on the receiving end of someone fixating on the norms, look, how many times I've told you it's got to be this way, this way, this way. So after a while, you see this with kids. Have I got it right? Have I got it right? So you get fretfulness, right? So fixation creates fretfulness, force creates follow. On the other hand, if the person if you're interacting and you're alienated from the whole shebang, you flout the rules. You just think, well, stuff it. Let's just get on with it. And then the person you're dealing with is not part of the secret here. Like they're thinking, you're flouting the rules. Should I tell anyone else? Or this could be a dominating person in the household. Stuff the, forget that. I'm in charge here, and I'm going to do this. And so then you get people fudging that behaviour. They sort of fudge it because they don't want to be seen to be sort of, it's not really that bad, is it? It's just flouting a little rule. Flout, flog. fudge, fudge, fudge. Oh my God, what have we done? So these are stress points in the interaction fabric. It's not to do with personalities, because no matter what sorts of people you get, you can push this out of them. And I'll give an example in a minute. And then finally with fight, you can just like get aggro, and the other person takes flight. So here you have 8 versions of stress, each one of which can be diffused through often a multiplicity of little tactics that might distract, change the focus. There's a whole set of different things here. But often this thing here feeds back into the other two. So I'm sick of this experience at the supermarket. I'm going to get my stuff online. And the corporate world saying, thank you. We love you here now. And so there's a whole series of corralling people through stress down other channels for which there's a solution, supposedly, but it's got its own little regimentation that then causes its own set of stresses. So, for example, I discovered a few months ago that some months earlier I inadvertently got onto Amazon Prime. I have no idea where that happened. But I'll give you a couple of examples here of how pernicious this can get. A lady in the US, I think it was in Illinois, was busy trying to do something. He tells the daughter, look, could you just get an Uber Eats? Because I don't think I can make dinner tonight. Sure, Mum, where's your phone? Because she's got the account. Goes online, does an Uber Eat, clicks all these boxes about whatever. But one of the boxes in there was to say, I waive any right to sue Uber for any things. And it was written in such a way that the girl just thinking, oh, tick, 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 ticked. The thing arrived. Everyone was happy. A month later or two, the mother was driving a car and was hit by an Uber Eats, takes the Uber Eats to court and loses in court because Uber presents she clicked the box here saying she doesn't take it. She waives the right to sue. She says, when did I do that? Oh, your daughter did it. So this is some of the cunning that's going on here. So be careful what you wish for. So in a sense, if you think about it, like those cartoon characters that you see walking and they put the balloon of their thoughts in the little balloon above their heads. But imagine all the actual rules and rights and waivers and immunities and so on we have actually signed away. If you took them all as you interact, you go onto a bus, what have you done? You go onto here, what's involved? To master all that, and this is where AI is going to come in, supposedly to provide solutions. It will read all the things that impact you as you're about to do something, of course, for a fee. And then, of course, they read in a certain way. And so it's just like platforms that give you choices. This is going to give you protection, but then there'll be another set of things going on there. So this is a fairly dystopic part of the situation, but that's the interesting problem for me, is going into these settings to unravel them. Because if you start talking to people about, for example, strata living, they're going to talk out of these boxes, which you can see here. So force leads to follow, fixate leads to fret, fight leads to flight, flouting leads to fudging. You can't fudge if you fixate, you can't force if you take flight, you can't, if you're fretting, you're not going to be flouting, etc. So there's a structure here. And there's a whole series of internal cunnings that can, one, to bring these to the surface so people can see them for what they are, but the other one is to diffuse them so people stay in the interaction, because you're in the marriage, you're in the classroom, you're in the bus, you're in something, you're on the ship, you're in the piazza. I mean, sometimes you just can't leave that quickly or without great cost and so on. And it's not necessarily to do with just you because you've got the problem. You might just be the symptom of the problem. Oh yeah, the other guy should be taken to task. Get the lawyer in. And of course, then you're back to the other system. So these 3 systems of legal relations and commodity engagement both funnel, if you think of those 2 on the left and the right, funnel into this stress area, and that stress area then pumps people back out. So this is a vicious circle of microscopically distributed forms of grief that have take a while to get the hang of, not impossible to do, and the sort of example to sort of end this bit on a kind of radical thought, because in the summary I said this has to do with God, because legal relations get developed like they have done because Hobbes told us that the Leviathan was so fearful, you better step in line, because if he disappears, it's life will be nasty, short, and brutish. Oh, okay, let's have the law, let's have the law. So we have the administrative state. But the interesting question there is, as you get into it, to what extent does it get so routinized and so merchandised by the legal profession, by mediators, and so on, that it's actually a death of a thousand cuts, So the question there is, well, where would you find God there? And the answer might be to cast back to a very long historical example. Back in the Roman time, when things were pretty grim as well for a variety of collapsing of empire and so on, one group of people went off and created monasteries, and they did so on the basis of structuring time. Let's do our escape from the world and inscribe ourselves within an atoning time of chronometric discipline. You start here, prayer there, office, round and round there, highlighted the notion of the hour. What hour is it of the day, etc. Here today, the equivalent of that would not be let's leave the world, because where the hell could you go? Why not go into the sinews of the world and look not for chronos, but for kairos, the point where you can line things up and say, aha, now we've got them red-handed. This is a beautiful example that blows the thing apart at one level. Or conversely, if we have 1,000 people doing this, how might we fix a lot of these little granular things through very discrete little ways? And as in questions we can ask about those. So the God is now found in the debris of our derelictions of not understanding even what the law is anymore. And ditto over on commodity engagement. There you have the thing of the invisible hand of the market, which, Adam Smith thought was the divine providence, because, wow, some craftsman in Peru can sell stuff in Manchester and he'll do some more craft because clearly there's a market. Fantastic. He gets the money, they get the craft. What could be fairer? Except, of course, there's all sorts of other things going on with markets and concentration, and the nature of these goods cycle money in certain ways and so on. But the interesting question there is, how would you create other kinds of goods that block out some of the monetization strategies that get in the way of them operating now? And a lot of that has to do with metering and boundary settings. So, for example, if you meter how many cars are sitting in a car park, you can actually get the equivalent fine that's meant to have been paid. If it's not paid, then it gets subtracted from the school that's indulged this dereliction. Or with common goods, you meter how many people are using the park to a point of thing, and if it's too thick, then you have congestion pricing. There's all sorts of little things you can do to build up this kind of thinking. I'm only giving you a taste of it, but that's the sort of lie of the land of it. So I'm open for questions. I'll put this back on so that I can go to the screens if you want to ask any questions, but I'll leave it at the bottom one because that's got the summary. There.
Well, thank you, Richard, for your presentation. Now, before we open the meeting to questions, comments and discussion with Richard, I have a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next Existentialist Society lecture will take place in 1 month's time, and that will be in Australia Saturday, the 1st of February, be the Friday evening in North America. And Dr. Pierre van Osselaar is speaking on Helene Sixou and the transformation of language. I'll repeat that, Helene Sixou and the transformation of language. Now, the Existentialist Society meetup has Zoom sessions at this time every week, every Saturday. And if you want to see all the sessions that are coming up, the details and the links, and often bios and abstracts, you'll find them on the Existential Society's meetup page. I've put the link to it in the chat. Now, for our questions, comments and discussion session, we'll use the raised hand method so that you can all speak in turn and not interrupt each other. You'll find the raised hand icon in the React tab at the bottom of the screen. So, Neville, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first name. And it's probably not Karen, but
Richard.
Richard.
I
know it's probably not. I didn't take it as Karen. I'm sure you're not a Karen. Look, thank you very much. I really do appreciate your talk presentation, but more so I appreciate your modelling. But one question, a critical question I have is about the entities that are outside the Venn. So, but I can understand no rights. So if you go no rights, you're stepping out of legal relations. And I can see flight in terms of social deviance, because if you're running away, then I suppose there's no knowledge of what's going on. But it's the merit goods. Why is merits goods outside of the Venn? Is it because you're making a statement that merit is non-analytical?
The thing about merit is it's a value. It's not concretized like a public good is real, like it's there. Merit is the merit of something is like a hypothetical. It starts off, wouldn't it be good if we had more trees in the street? And that's just a merit good. But once you think, well, how are we going to do it? Do we incentivize people to plant their own? Should the council do it? They're all the different things you might do with the merit, but it's sitting on the outside. Now, admittedly, unlike the other two, which are in a sense moving away, like flight means I'm out of here. No right means I've got nothing to fall back on. Merit is I can dream. I can dream about a better world. That's of whatever it is. I wish there were better manners, for example. Fat chance, but still, I dream of whatever. Now, the thing is, it's where the merit, when it comes to an economic notion of merit good, is when that dream is contagious or widespread. And you get demerit. You can get demerit paranoias too. So, for example, a good example of this is like Queensland's changing the age of responsibility down to the age of 10. So kids who throw a rock at a window run the risk of being charged for an offence rather than just being. Admittedly, this is not the right way to do it either. By therapeutically reintegrated, but that's a demerit good. Like I don't want that. I don't want that in my neighbourhood. Take them away. I don't care what you do. So that's a very flimsy merit, but it's that's what it's. So it's not a. I suppose if there were like the campaign against, well, for example, green campaigns is a green economy is a merit good, and it's a big dream, and people think, yeah, there's a lot to this merit good. Let's get into it, and so you end up seeing club goods, private goods, commons, and public goods all aligning themselves with that merit good. So it's there as a it doesn't have substance except in the sense of a hope.
All right, so hope. But can I pick you up there that I think then perhaps what might advance your thesis and your work might be a fourth forms of political engagement, whereby that so the meritocracy meritocracy would be very much part of something that could be analysed.
Yes.
And I also pick up, in terms of what you're saying about Green's vision of a greener future as a hope, I pick up Wayne Hudson's work. I don't know if you know Wayne, but Wayne Hudson's work on utopia, which is a shift away from the 19th century, 19th and 17th, 18th century sort of utopian literature to a more analytical sort of appreciation of a more finite unit, finite, but also an analytical, a finite vision of utopia, which has analytical capacity.
Yes, the point I make with that is that from where I'm coming from, these are ways of working within the servile state to work within their own discourses. There are many other things you could do, which I call social renovation, which are outside this space, of which the utopianism and messianic movements and systems of influence taking. I've given a talk on social renovation, and I thought if I contrast that just to mark out an even bigger space, not only was I fearing I was frightening you, I was already getting frightened myself. But yes,
right.
There's much more to. This is not a theory of how to deal with the world. This is how to renovate internal to the servility of the state apparatus and market. It's not.
You're speaking within the framework of the early 20th century distributionism of Bullock and Chesterton.
Yeah.
So this is the space that you're operating in. Fair enough.
They tried to do that as a reform of where we're at, but as we've come to see, that got marginalised, squished out, and squashed, so it's very hard to there's other ways of doing that, but that's in my system that becomes a social renovation venture, and that's a much bigger piece.
Okay.
It's frustrating because part of my problem is I've done many interventions in 40 years across a vast range of governments, corporates, 2,500 students who in turn have done projects, volunteer things. I have an unquenchable appetite to not so much rescue people, but to clean up mess. I can't help myself. But because I'm a sociologist, when I'm mucking around in a mess, I start thinking, why is it like this? Without forming judgments. The council, that. I don't go there. That sickens me. I go, okay, try this, try that. And sometimes it starts conversations. People say, why are you doing that outside? So a good example of that sort of thing is there's a lovely street where I'm in Elwood, but off our street there's Milton and Broadway. Beautiful tree-lined thing, gets covered in leaves in autumn. Lovely people, of course, with lovely dogs. It's sort of suburban. But interestingly enough, the neglect of the older buildings is quite palpable. And so I say, well, supposing we had everyone having a sweep the leaves into the road thing, and people say, the council does that, but it doesn't do it enough. It should do more. I think, yeah, okay. But supposing just for a minute we did a video of dancing in the street with the fine ladies and young men with the dogs on a leash at the fence so they can freely move the leaves out into the street. We video that to the sound of thing, and then the council truck comes along, scooping all the leaves up in one full swoop, playing the music as well. Is that not going to increase the value of the street? Now, if you calculate and I've done this in other contexts, you calculate the capital value, it's far in excess of the inconvenience of doing a sweep session. Yeah. But it's amazing how dogged people are. They're caught up in this social deviance thing of fixating on this or fretting over that. Is like, actually, by the way, the thing that gave me this part of it for me was reading Dante's Divine Comedy. When you get into hell there, I thought, what's the modern version of that where people can't help but want to tell you about what's stuffing them up?
Yeah.
And empathetic, careful, caring people think, oh, maybe we could do this for you or try that, rather than thinking maybe there's righteous indignation here. Maybe we could power something up, but you need others. Is there a commonality? And of course, then people want to just have the solidarity of the plight, not the solidarity of the promise. And so it gets complicated inside this framework, which is why Chesterton and Belloc fade from the thing. So I'm sort of recovering what they've done to partly do a critique of economics and law, but also to show that the economics and law as practiced today, particularly in Australia, is funneling people into social deviance, which is then feeding into more forms of corporate and legal machinations.
Brilliant, brilliant. David, could you just allow me one more question? I know I've taken a bit of time here, but Richard here this is the rare opportunity for me as an intellectual historian and sociologist to be able to speak with a colleague who can understand my work and I can understand his. So if I can ask one question, just a quick comment before is that I like Erasmus, the praise of folly in terms of the thing about social deviance and comedy. But my question is, as a fellow sociologist in the same space, I don't work with Parsons. I work with C. Wright Mills, and I'm wondering whether do you think that with Mills' work, on the sociological playing out of industrialism and the sort of elitist mechanics within the American capitalist system, do you think that there is some sort of connections that could be drawn out here as well?
I was a great fan of C. Wright Mills when I first came across him, and Peter Berger and that crowd, and Goulner and so on. But looking back, there's a sort of like machismo critique vanity involved here, because like you have a gaze, like the sociological imagination, or Berger's construction of social construction of reality. You have a gaze that sees through all the deceptions, delusions, and so on, and can sniff out the difficulties and so on, which is not bad. I mean, it opened up my eyes to a lot of stuff. But to try and alter this, to sort of imagine how would you get 10,000 people to get on board with something like this, that's not going to cut it. So, for example, one of the things I've done with social renovation is realigned it to the discourse of angels, because it's the only way I can get to people without having to use sociology and say, here's how to think about what this kind of angel can do for you. And it's a discourse of reflection for them. And I've started experimenting with it. Oh, yes, this works. So there's a problem here of scaling up. I mean, and I've caused a lot of grief, I suppose, because in terms of the students I've taught, they do fire up and they do go out and set up businesses and take on things, and it's caused all sorts of grief because people are just do the critique, man, just do the critique. Be in the know about what's wrong. And I'm saying be on the side of what goes right. Like, it's an immortality issue here. Like, Badiou is a good example of someone says, are you in the eternal or are you in the froth of the ups and downs of today? So I sympathise. I understand what you're saying about the precision of their gazes, but the problem I've had with them is it doesn't get you very far when you're sitting in a committee or trying to deal with a neighbourhood house or all the neighbourhood houses, or a casualty ward an emergency ward in a hospital, or corruption in government, or I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. And lucky for me, because I was in Tassie for 20 years, I taught a lot of people. I pretty much got to know every single industrial sector, prisons and production, agriculture, agribusiness, blah. and then would get students jobs in those areas, and they'd feed back with what they'd found and done and tried. And sometimes then people would call me and, oh, your student's done this, could you do a consulting because we want to go big? Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. Mostly on the sniff of the excitement, not monetization of the advice, which has cost me dearly. But at least I don't get bored or cynical.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to catching up with you on other.
Just by the way, I should mention, feel free anyone to email me and say what a lot of crap, or that was inspiring, or whatever you want to say. I am an avid email replier.
And you're in Brisbane, are you?
No, I'm in Melbourne.
In your Melbourne. Okay. All right. Okay. Never mind.
Sorry, where are you?
In Brisbane.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Neville. Richard, if you'd care to put your email in the chat, if you'd like people to email you. Anyway, it's now Les's turn. Go ahead, Les.
Oh, thanks, David. And thanks, Richard, for a great talk. I'm a great lover of diagrams because it helps me understand a certain area of study. I've got hopefully two quick questions. One is on the case of Uber and the judge ruling that she couldn't sue because of the damage from the accident, I would have thought, this is what I find strange, I would have thought that this judge, or maybe some judges, would have ruled that exception clause or that clause in the contractual arrangement as unconscionable in the way it was presented to the customer. So that's the first thing. And the second one was your diagram, forms of legal relations. Could you please give me a concrete example with the disability dimension or aspect? Give me a concrete example of how that comes in.
Yeah, so you're an ambulance driver. You're speeding down the road. The police pull you over, and maybe you didn't have your siren on because it's 3 a.m. and it's a clean road, and there are no intersections. So you're flying along there, and the policeman stops you. Says, "Look, sorry, I've got immunity, meaning your authority over me is disabled."
Oh, disabled. The authority is disabled.
It's not a disability as in an infirmity. Right. It's a thwarting of the right. And this is why the word right gets used in so many different ways. The right of the policeman to stop you is thwarted by the immunity you now invoke relative to being an emergency service worker.
Yeah. So it's kind of like an override.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, your situation override. Okay.
And you can see, by the way, why if you logically fill this out and use that to structure where the diversity of documents are in a legal AI corpus of works, you're going to get a lot better results.
Mm. Oh, thanks. So have you got a comment on the Uber case?
Oh, I only got a news article. It just tickled my fancy rather than studying it, because it might have been, for example, that there are other aspects of the crash that made it illegal. But it was reported that apparently it was because she clicked that box. I do know of another case. My wife had this problem because she's a lawyer. She looked up the terms and conditions of Uber, and if you're in a dispute with Uber, it has to get resolved in Australia. It has to get resolved in a Dutch court. You know what I mean? So they're using all the one of the things this opens up, just by the way, rather than thinking of deviance as like St Kilda's just down the road. Oh, so many deviants are there. No. If you go down the Paris end of Elwood, there's much more nefarious deviants because they're running all sorts of, not scams, but they've got monetization regimes that are truly stunning in what they're really doing. And they happily sleep at night. And there's, whether it's old people's homes or advice. I came across a married couple. For God's sake, I sold this over a coffee, I would have thought. But anyway, married couple, difficult divorce, go to family law. They have to be seen by a psychologist to write things. So it's an interview with him, with her, then with him with the kids, and her with the kids, and then with the parents. $20,000 for that advice. split between the two at $10,000 each, $20,000 for a 30-page document. I'm thinking, like, I mean, sociologically, I've been thinking if there's that much passion in the dispute, there's a lot of passion still that could be released another way, you know. And it's amazing. Divorce is a really good example because I see a lot of men coming out the other side of that, and they've got no idea what's happened, and they end up, in a sense, in a spiral of sort of self-negating thoughts about it's to do with a gender or an agenda and so on. Whereas it's a question of recovering agency as a man, which has got its own particular way to do it as a sociological journey, not a piece of psychology. You know, it's, a good example of that. I taught a prisoner, and he was doing sociology, and it turned out that the police chief was also doing the same course. And this guy was very defeated and, oh, I'm just doing. So what are you in for? "Oh, I murdered my wife." Okay. Okay, well, let's start with the grade you're going to get here. Let's see if you can aim to get a better grade than the police commissioner. Wouldn't that be cool? Give me an incentive. We'll go for this. He kind of smiled at that idea, like, really? Yeah, look, he's probably not going to get better than the credit. We can get credit plus. Come on, do it. So he starts getting interested. And then later on I said, so what did you actually do? And he said, "I strangled my wife." I then said, this is sociology for you. I then said, "Can you recall the expression on her face at the time?" And he buried that. And I could see it coming back to me thinking, oh my God. And I said, "So what do you see?" "Just fear." I said, "Okay, you've made someone really, really scared. You've done something really, really significant. You now have 30 years to undo this. So start now and think, what did that face look like when you proposed marriage?" And so he starts thinking, oh yeah, I was at. And for a moment there, was transported to this enchanted moment. I said, okay, now you've got the before and after photo in your head. You need to work backwards now to sort of work out what were all the derelictions, because it's not so much that you've done things wrong, except for the killing bit. Often with men, it's failing to do the right thing rather than doing wrong things. And so you go through, and you'll get back to that point. Next time you get out of jail, you can actually go and date. Like, this is just interaction, not therapy. But it's amazing what unfolds with therapeutic regimes. I'm very skeptical about them. I mean, I had a Lifeline person tell me the other day, she gets a call from someone, "Oh, my psychiatrist is away for 4 weeks. He said if I've got problems, call Lifeline." You're paying, like, Medicare's paying God knows what per session, and that's the fallback. Yeah, I'm doing surgery now, but I can't, I'm away, so call the garage guy. Like, I mean, it's like the sheer entitlement of thinking, I've got the cure, you've got the problem, you pay me, but if I'm busy, like, Lifeline will do. I mean, I have an eye for that. I ferret this sort of stuff out. And if I have to, if I see a really recurrent thing, I will track them down, just as a matter of, like, a collective of a butterfly. Like, this is evil. This is not, it might look good, smell good at the right restaurant, but wow, this guy sleeps with this behavior. And that keeps me honest, because I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to, because I don't know what the other side of the story is, but on paper, that's a shameful episode. But if you have 1,000 people finding shameful episodes, you can surround a whole elite. So, like in Poland, they put microphones under a restaurant, under the tables of a restaurant that all the right people went to, and they collected all this stuff, and it caused some serious grief amongst some of the more corrupt elements of the Polish elite. That sort of sting in the tail of observation, I think, is worth knowing it exists. I don't say I'm not into Red Brigade mania. I mean, but I do think there's a lot to learn about just how the society works. You know, you need to start from a position of ignorance, not moral integrity or judgment that you can spot malfeasance. You want to sniff out how it actually works, because they're often collaborators, and as you saw with the deviants, that are people that are flouting and others that are fudging and those that are fretting, and it's just a whole mishmash of self-reproducing deviants. Anyway, end of rant. Sorry.
Oh, thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Les. DLJ, your turn.
Yes, thank you. My sound okay? You can hear?
Yes.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you. Right. I'm going to third in a row to say thank you, particularly for the diagrams. So that seems like it's unanimous now. I particularly like them. In my head, I'm mapping them onto my own. So that's very useful.
I mean, if you email me, I can send you the
Oh, excellent. Yes, thank you.
It's fine.
I think David will
So I'm still trying
publish it
to.
tomorrow as well. Yeah, so content as well. Yeah, it would have been nice to have a screen share from the beginning because I was a little bit lost without the visuals. So I'm going to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. All right. We all do it. So I've been looking for a critique. I have a minor one, and it's aesthetic. One of these things is not like the others. The first two cubes, I see that you've got, for example, you've got. Oh, hang on. You've just obscured it now with a. I can't see. There you go.
Oh, sorry. Just
You've got, right. On the first diagram, you've got right down the bottom is top back. Likewise for fixate, and then for private goods, you drop that down to the bottom on the third diagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in other words, your cube is kind of rotated compared. The first two seem to match. So I'm
yes, I did actually. Sorry, yes, I did have it that way up to 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago.
Oh, okay. So I'm sitting here thinking, is that intentional? I've got to understand that, or is it simply because you chose to do it differently?
No, well, the reason was I was trying to make the argument about what you see. So with commodities, you see them as search goods, credence goods, experience goods, and merit goods. You engage the phenomenology of how they work appears on the top, but then I thought, so then maybe that should be more visible because the others are more visible, but I could just as easily flip it back to where it was, because they do sort of in some ways line up horizontally as well, because there's a interesting alignment that way. But I mean, I've only just constructed some of these things. I mean, that's why talks like this are so valuable for me, because it's a right kick in the bum. I overthink and overread, and then I'll read more to read and just die.
I agree. It's when you present it that you get the good feedback. So the audience, i.e. me in this case, is thinking, now, have you done that deliberately for a reason, that one doesn't match the other two, and should you match the other two?
I think I'll go back. I only did that about 2 or 3 hours ago, so I've got to go back, and you've flagged something I probably would have thought myself, but yes, I've got to make sure there is an argument that the cubes run homologically across as well, so that right and fixate and cert, and that's where you can say, wait a minute, private good is more appropriately connected to right, and I had it like that before, but then I thought these days you don't see the private good, you go on a search engine to search for it first.
Yes, I see.
You see what I mean? So, but then I thought, well, wait a minute, why am I privileging phenomenology there and not else? Anyway, sorry, there's just conceptual tensions flying all over the place.
All good, all good. I appreciate it. I appreciate you just forcing me to think about that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, DLJ. Joe, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you for the diagrams and the presentation. I very much appreciate it. And I'm still actually digesting some of the information itself. But one question I would have is, that one of the things that I look at when I see this framework is how these frameworks would map on to different cultures. And so, like, how in some cultures, like, I mean, is this something that can be treated as something as a universal? Because I think that if you were to apply this, in a more collectivist culture versus a more individualistic culture, that you may have different responses based on how the values of the individuals themselves and the culture itself, even if they've been convinced or in some way, shape, or form to believe something that it doesn't necessarily align with reality. You know, so I'm just seeing is that how would this vary across cultures if you were to apply it? Like, what would be some of those differences that you would see? Can you give an example of if you were to apply this to a country that had more individualistic values versus a
Good. No, that's a
collective?
fair point. First of all, this is built. This is running hand in glove with the servile state. So global capitalist reach, insofar as one of its tentacle goes up the Amazon River and wraps itself around a tribe and starts to get them to start thinking about doing this and chopping some trees and getting some money and then getting something else, and then an administrator turns up, and so you get the colonization process. This analytic follows that tentacle. It's not meant to be sitting over on the other side of the fence with the culture. A good example that would make this even more stark is Aboriginal society, as it once was, is completely the opposite to all of this. I mean, you couldn't possibly, I mean, did quite a bit of anthropology, and so totemic systems and kinship systems and land usage and all that sort of stuff. You can't, it destroys this kind of thinking completely. However, the social renovation system, which is a bigger beast of a thing because it doesn't make cultural claims like this one does, can wrap itself around those. That's a different beast because it works off the cultural cues that people want to live by and works over them. So it's not quite culturally sympathetic. It's more like Jesuit the way the Jesuits moved into South America, where they worked with the lie of the culture, albeit transforming it at various points, and then unfortunately followed by colonial influences that then did radical changes. But initially, the Jesuits were very, very keen to kind of stay with the grain of the culture they were in, sometimes to some interesting results. So I'm intrigued with that logic in this day and age, and you get into all sorts of semiological issues where you have to sort of think about the semiosis of how do you replicate that kind of thing. So for example, like in Aboriginal culture, you have brother groups that are essentially exporting their sisters out to get wives in. And so it's sort of like, in some ways, you could argue that kinship system was the very first form of a commodity because it's got an exchange value. But then they do other things with it, which are quite remarkable in a completely different way, from which we can learn a lot, but not in this system because this is like a internal therapy. Like I'm stuck inside this neo globalist law, global law system. How can I tinker inside it and activate people are thinking, why am I sitting in this prison? This is this kind of thing. So it's more like the Communist Manifesto of Marx as opposed to the Das Kapital thing, which is an actual analytic of a system which you can change in a much more intricate way. I mean, not that worked, but at least it was an interesting try.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I very much appreciate the answer as well, the way you articulated that, and how it works back, and how it is the opposite from more indigenous type of cultures. Doesn't, but that makes the model still valid. Obviously, it's just the results may be will differ and be interesting in that sense. But I mean, I need to look at this a little bit more because there's a lot on the table, and I very much appreciated the way you walked through each of the slides, because I think that this is for me, this is a very interesting model. I've been kind of chatting with people in the chat a little bit about it as well. So thank you for your answer. Maybe one follow-on question is that I had been thinking about is, as far as the legal context, something that would empower people. I've thought about it in the sense of, if data is used to exploit people, right, at this particular moment in time, which it is, would data ownership be a way empowering people?
Um,
And how would that maybe
yeah,
affect?
you could make an argument. There is an argument and a governance argument in the data world which says two things. One is that the data, insofar as the data refers to something, the legal entity of that something, be it a person or a local government or something, has the right to validate it, obscure it if need be. And there's all sorts of what's sometimes called data translucence rather than transparency, where you can fudge just enough to provide privacy, but not enough to destroy the analytics. So there's some clever maths that does that. So yeah, that it would work. The problem with that is that the data you're describing is sitting under these three systems. Now, you could do a fourth one of just data, but then data is just way more transforming than that. It's not part of capitalism, it's part of writing. So
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, in the legal sense.
But there are things you can do. For example, with all those goods, you can measure things. You can collect data on some of this stuff. So, for example, a really good example, I use this as a data thing really quite often. If you take domestic arguments or a strike, a worker strike, there is always the thing of how intense was the episode, how long did it last, and how frequently does it recur. So you've got a three-dimensional thing, and there's things you can do to create this like a box of how big is the strike activity. Is it big because it's massive and just one-off event, or is it big because it's small but it recurs over a long period of time, or is it big because it's not very occurring and not very long but really intense? So there's these three different dimensions, and they crop up everywhere when you've got data and time series. You can sort of tweak that sort of thing in. Once you get to that level, then some of that stuff you can use in this system to show, for example, take medical centers, for example. They have an inflow. Oh, we need a medical center because there's Medicare. But very, very quickly they do what the Americans sociologists call creaming. They take the monetization of fast interactions of small things to click over the rate, the reimbursement rate, and slowly try and veer off hard things to the specialists, who then will veer off to other specialists. And so you end up with these massive branching over the nuance of the said malady, when the originating problem was something that could have been solved earlier on, when it was earlier on, but because of the referral system, it actually exacerbates the complexity of the malady and monetizes massively on the thing, and then causes all sorts of problems with insurance. A lot of these things are quite self-defeating, but I'm not trying to solve them in this system, because this is just a diagnostic tool to sniff out these different forms. Because some of them, once you do sniff them out, people think, I'm doing that, am I? It's a visibility thing, but it's not about a person. We all, the journalism of the day, the therapy of the day, the new media of the day is about people. Donald Trump or somebody. There's always like, let's play the drama of bad people, whereas it's systemic and it's very, very subtle. Like the Murray-Darling Commons good. That's amazing to watch. If you go through the title records to see who's owned lands on the river, you get these funny little bits of land that are on the river to get a water right, and it's just there for a pump. It's not. It just pumps into a truck and it goes to Queensland. There's all sorts of weird. Or people putting pumps under the water because the meters stop at a certain level, so there are pools still left. It can be quite deep, but they're just a pool given the average depth of the river. They stick a pump underneath that and suck that out. And it's not even metered. So like when you get capitalism looking at this sort of stuff, there are people thinking, how else can I squeeze some money out of this thing? I can think those thoughts. I mean, I've worked with people that think those thoughts, and I do it as a thought experiment, only to look at the sheer horror of what it looks like in my mind. And I think, well, how would I counter that? What's the immune system going to do about a thing like that? That's how I think. And it makes me, I can I mean, I can cross-dress into some of those settings and look like an architect or a designer or a ad man or all sorts of, I mean, it's a bit funny, but I do it just to kind of connect, because there's some of them are just people. They just get waylaid into these weird forms of success and don't understand what on earth they're delivering. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't want to take up any more time, but it's really, the more you see it, you really see the really interesting parts of the club goods, the common goods, and the relationship between the experience and the credence, and that's, you can relate that to individual and the social. Really, you've done that very, very nicely. So I appreciate this.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, any feedback, if anyone wants to send me commentary, that would be water for a thirsty guy. Okay, like it's not like, I can't drink my own piss here. Like it's like, I think it's partly because I've moved from Sydney and I'm now in a different setting where I'm working through these sorts of fora rather than chums and pub crawls or anything like that. And at my age, it's sort of, this is my last run to do something interesting. So, and I'd yet to work out where to go, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. So any feedback, welcome.
I would really love to, if you could put your, I don't know if I missed it where you put your email in the chat, but
I was trying to get on the chat thing. David, I'll send it to you. You've got, if you could put it on the chat, you've got it there. I don't know what I've done to my chat here.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sherry, your turn.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. I have to confess I'm on a phone, and so seeing your diagrams is really difficult for me. I have, and I hope it's not obvious to other people, but it probably is. I was trying to figure out if you were mapping out how you see things versus how you would like to envision things, and also whether or not you're trying to address the fractaling of might versus right, and how it has an interplay in nature, like you were talking about earlier, workers uniting to fight against the machine, that kind of scenarios. Are you addressing them philosophically in your presentation or in your mapping, or are you just simply mapping things in general? I wasn't following exactly what the purpose of your thought process here is.
These things are a bit like the syntax of law, the syntax of deviance. It's like a grammatical elaboration so that you can talk it better. You can make distinctions that catch a nuance that other people don't get because they don't have the word for it. They don't even know the distinction between it. I mean, if you say, for me, I hear people, I'm thinking, and if they're looking a bit stressed, I'm on alert already. Is this a flight risk? Is this a fight situation? Is it a flouting? Is it a fudging? Is it a fretting? Is it a fix? And I bounce around. Sometimes people move around. Sometimes I can move them around and get them to a different position. So, okay, we're going to have a fight. Let's do it this way. So it's a grammar that structures the etiquette of my interaction with someone. Now, you could use it in other ways, like as you're suggesting, to do, say, social change strategies, but that for me is under social renovation, which I come at in a completely different way. This is internal to the nitty-gritty of how we're stuck with the institutional order we have today.
Okay, so taking somebody who's having to address an issue, and you're helping map out where they are and where they want to go with a problem, using this model, this tool?
Well, for example, if someone's having trouble with, well, for example, a good example here would be people having difficulty with apartment living. So, for example, I've had a letter from a real estate agent saying that their tenants got a leak in their place, and so I have to be seen to be answering that question by saying, "Oh, there's a leak. We'll go search it." But in the meantime, I inspect to see if it is a leak and it's not just condensation because the ventilation in the unit is so bad. So the agent's trying to shift it over towards the body corporate. But rather than just shifting it back and saying, well, no, it's not, it's that, it's your fault. So there, call your lawyer if you want to. I don't go that way. What I do is I circle the situation. So I've done a full study of that unit. I've gone under the ground, followed all the pipes, put cameras in. I chase the agent, see who else he's got. I sniff and sniff until I think, aha, I've got the person cornered now. So when I make a move, they're going to think it's just this, but in fact, it's going to have all these other little traps that'll capture the moment. So, because I don't want to offend the tenant, the tenant's vulnerable. So it's very hard. It's like a hostage situation. I can't go heavy on the agent because they might just blame the tenant. So it's a cunning, this is useful for that kind of thing where you want to calibrate a gentle, cunning, sly move to get some, get the hostage out, as it were, not take on some big structure. Social renovation does that more by dissolving certain structures and creating others. This is more, we're stuck with it. What can you do inside it? So,
so you're mapping it here,
mapping the
to help strategize.
Yeah, and also to then write documents, for example, that state behaviors and duties and powers and in a way that's nice and clean and concise.
I got to say, I worked in contracts for a fairly large city, and contracts become noise and paper to line your desks sometimes. And it's so frustrating. It made me sick to think all the work I put in to just know that that's how it ended in the end, the way people would treat the whole thing.
Yeah, a good example of that, just by the way, if you're in city administration, when I first came to Melbourne, I went to Sydney for 20 years, but for a while there in the year 1999, 2000, 2001 and 2, because I was at an idle moment, this is typical behavior, I saw a tender for the restructuring of government zoning laws for the different local government authorities in Victoria, which is, I think, 121, I think, now. Anyway, so I looked at it and I thought, and I didn't have this level of sophistication then, but I could smell exactly what you said, that the paper gets shuffled around. There are Word documents, versions, fights over which version is the valid one, cut and paste, appends, replace. Oh, I meant to append. It's been used as to replace. So this whole mess and so the government puts out a tender, could someone please solve this problem? And all these consultants came out, 121 bids came in, all the big consultants we've got this software, we've done manuals in the army, we know this kind of problem. They didn't know it at all. They just thought it was documents, document management. I turned up and so I thought, okay, is this what, okay. So there's one guy, an American guy from Idaho, of all things, forgotten his name now. It was, anyway, he was a nice guy. But he was Mr. Planning Officer at the state government levels. He saw this whole mess and he was the guy dying under the weight of all this. So I said to him, so, we're trying to do this. And he sort of gave me a bit of a feeler for it. I thought, okay. So then I rang these people in the US, it used to be called Zope Corporation, and they were one of the people that built Python up as a language with Guido was the inventor of the language, and he worked for them. So I rang them and said, look, if I design the tender for this thing for free, you don't have to pay me, and you win, I get 30% of the total thing. And if I do any more work, I get 70%, you get 30%. But if you do the work, we go on 37. They said, you're telling me you're going to write the whole thing. We don't have to pay anything. If it fails, nothing happens. Yeah, that's right. And if it does happen, we pay you. Yeah. I said, fine, man. Like, Americans are good at this level. I mean, in Australia, no one would do that. I said, yeah, do it, man. So I wrote this thing up and I tracked down a couple of ex-students that were working in local government stuff and a few other things. And I wrote a thing, and it's exactly like, as it turns out, the notion of law here. I've got autonomy, flexibility, compliance. In the planning systems, there's the compliance thing, which is what calls overlays. There's the flexibility thing, which are the zones. What zone are you in? Is it semi-industrial, blah, blah, blah. The overlays are fears, like vegetation, fire risk, and so on. And the autonomy one with the scheduling mechanisms for capturing heritage buildings and so on. So once I got that logic worked out, I then designed this thing, and then the other guy said, "Oh yeah, okay." Submitted, and I got shortlisted. So out of 121, about 8 got shortlisted. By which time then I thought, oh shit, this is going to get serious. So I then started going flat out on this thing for free, on the hope that maybe it comes off. But anyway, I did it, and the beauty of it was, because I'd spoken to this guy from the US, I've forgotten his name. Anyway, I had a feel for the work culture. So the other finalists turned up with suits and corporate chickie babes and PowerPoint slides. And this is what we've done here, 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 here. I turned up
The horse
in jeans.
and pony show is what we would call it.
I just turned up in corduroys and a jumper and a CD, and I said, "Here's a prototype of what we can do for you. So let's pretend that you're going to change this law in this place. Let's go through it and see what it looks like." And they were just amazed. I mean, we did it. It was not a fully functioning thing, but it did enough for them to see. And so when they felt like they were just captivated by it, they just thought, "Wow, how much is this going to cost?" And I said, "Well, probably about $1 million." And I said, "But it's open source software, so you can keep it, replicate it, sell it to other cities. We don't care. No license fee per seat. You just pay the $1 million. You get it." And said, "What's the $1 million for?" I said, "For our ears, we're going to listen really carefully to your problem." And I did. And the funny thing was, the planning offices in each of the local government things used to call the central office and the state office the font police, because they kept using Word and buggering up the font requirements. And so there's just this waste of time and energy, just pathetic bureaucracy. And this just came in like a breath of fresh air. And this is my problem. I do this instinctively, and I think, what have I done? How did this work? And because I don't listen to the ins and outs of the qualms, except for the solution, I end up sounding positive. But then I think, wait a minute, I must have. This is why I've got to get these things out, because there's like loads. We're talking about 20, 30 major jobs. As I said, 2,500 students and their projects. It's just a massive things, and I'm running out of time. So finally, I'm going to, not that I want to rehash my journey through sociology. It's more like, can I distill this down so other people can sort of say, "Oh, I see what he's doing. Yeah, I can do that too."
Interesting. Thank you for explaining. I appreciate your time doing that for me. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Sherry. Rick, go ahead.
Hi, David. How do I sound? All right? Is my microphone okay, or is it too loud?
Yep.
Yeah. I've talked with Richard Volpato before, and sometimes I hope I'm saying this in a really polite way here. Most of your work comes from people like Parsons, as somebody else mentioned. So Parsons, if anybody else doesn't know, it's sort of a specialist sort of field. I think my understanding of Richard Volpato's work is that a lot of it involves, not all of it, but what is called cybernetics. So there was a bunch of scientists a bunch of sociologists back in the 1920s, I believe, including Parsons and other people. There were other groups in Australia called the Sydney Push, which was run by, which John Anderson, the famous Jewish sociologist, was involved with. They're all about trying to map society into, and they talked with a lot of scientists, like people like Einstein and these sorts of people, physicists and stuff, as I understand, to try to make a link between sociology and basically engineering, and so they they called this second order cybernetics. And so you get third order cybernetics, fourth order cybernetics, etc. So they're like increasing approximations to the real life phenomenon sort of thing. And so in social cybernetics, the pieces of the machine can actually think for themselves. So it's got quite a lot more complexity than normal cybernetics, where you say, I've got a gear here, it's got a ratio of 2 to 1 to the other gear. I turn this gear will turn twice for every time I turn this gear, sort of thing. So it's correct me if I'm wrong, Richard. Does that sound like it's slightly above what you're talking about here today, I suppose?
It's the notion of a system is important, but the way you've described it as being sort of mechanical doesn't quite fit, because the issue here is you've got forces that coalesce and go down conduits that are not preordained. There's all sorts of complexities. So John Anderson, the philosopher in Sydney, is important because he kind of thought human minds, are just another entity floating around in the flux and flow of messy events. So you can do what you can, hence the need for analytics, but you can't get an overview. There is no godlike overview of the world or some section of it. So what you do is essentially think of it like mess. How do I clean up this mess? And so you look for patterns, think, well, wait a minute, this could go here, 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 and then think, what does that mean? Oh, now, and so you work off that, and sometimes it gets contagious. People think, well, I'll do that too. So, so there's a bit more fluidity in the activism I'm talking about. But and eventually, I will give a talk on social renovation. So the full gamut of there are nine domains of renovation. It's like a monster of a thing in some ways, but analytically, it's not that complicated. But doing it's got. I mean, it takes me, to give you an example, it takes me about 800 hours to train someone to do that kind of stuff in the past. I mean, when I had students going through, be 800 hours of dedicated work. So it's not straightforward. You don't read your way into it. You've got to, I mean, a simple thing like participant observation. It's easy to think you can walk in and observe things, but when something depends on it, when life depends on it, for example. So a good example would be, and the way I teach students to do it is they go to the supermarket, buy nothing, walk through there for 3 minutes, walk out, buy nothing. And students say, oh, but I'm going to be embarrassed. No, this is step one. You've got to walk in there and walk out. And of course, they walk in there thinking, what are people going to think? What's going to happen? I don't know. How do I walk out? I'll pretend to buy something. No, someone's watching. I've got a fellow student watching. You cannot pretend. You've got to walk in and then walk out. If you want to explain why, if someone asks, you can say, I forgot my car keys. Any fabulation will do. But you've got to walk in and walk out 3 minutes later. As soon as they walk out, they say, oh, they kind of flushed a bit. And you say, what did you see? And they say, there's all sorts of things. So what was in the bottom row of the first aisle? Well, that's where all the jams were. And it's amazing how much they can debrief when they're feeling embarrassed. Whereas if someone goes in the know to observe something, they can't see a thing. I mean, this is one of the weird things about participant observation. So in my case, a good example was this massive flare up in a hospital where, casually, that's like, anything going wrong there. I think everyone presses the panic button, especially managers. So one of them rang me and said, there's this thing going on. We're not sure what's going on in the casualty. So I said, look, I'll go there and have a look. And I'll walk around the hospital as well to see what's going on. So I walked down there to the hospital. I had a hearty breakfast, then waited in the car park for someone to leave, knelt to deal my shoelace up so I could breathe in the fumes of the exhaust. And whoa, I mean, not a lot, but enough to throw you flushed and you go, and I stagger into the casualty saying, I don't know what's happened. My heart's beating. And I go, what? Of course, I'm thinking, what could happen if, but immediately I start to see all sorts of things. And one of the things I spotted was the changeover from next shift was now mediated by a common computer, whereas the nurses had their own little way of talking to each other face to face with a whiteboard. Now they were fiddling with keyboard and the Control F, I think, backspace, and there's all this fidgeting around, and there's like time. Is the changeover happen? Oh, I've got to go now. I've got to pick up kids. Okay, thanks. Oh shit, now what do I? Like that's where the problem was. That's where the problem was. But it's easy for people amongst themselves to start saying, oh, it's the kind of jobs we get in that kind of time of the day. It's the administrators. Like you've got to spot that thing. You can feel it, and then you say it. So literally, I wrote to the guy that afternoon. He said, oh, no, actually, the management committee want to have a brief about what you're going to study. I said, already done it. and that's the answer. Try that for a change. And so I think some of this stuff's much easier than it seems, but there is a discipline to it that's not easy to come by because we get too opinionated about the gaze. And we, scopophilic, I like to see everything, understand everything. And we're not in the know. We're flotsam in the sea here. Like we can get a momentary glance because of an upswing in the wave, It's much more fluid than just a system. I mean, it is systemic, but it's not a system that you can mechanically kind of tinker with.
Thanks, Richard. It is a bit hard to describe to novices. I have read some Parsons and I've read some John Anderson, and I do understand that it's more than just treating it mechanistically, but I'm just trying to conceptualize it for people that struggle with the ideas. That's all. Obviously, the way a physicist conceptualizes the world is very different from the way a sociologist conceptualizes the world. And I just made a comment in the chat saying that, like in quantum mechanics, for example, the measuring of something can actually change the length of the ruler, sort of thing, because the ruler that you're using to measure something actually changes based on the phenomenon that you're measuring, sort of thing. I think I said that right. It's like you say, it's about experiencing the environment and being able to draw some sort of levers out of that you can then use to get a grip on the phenomenon, I suppose. Would that be more correct? Or
that's I mean, the main issue is not to be in the know. It's to feel the ignorance, feel like if you're naked in the street, you're going to feel that. You think, oh God, what am I going to do? It's
so like Socrates said.
Yeah, Socrates does it well. He kind of just chills out, like stops, freezes, and everything. What's wrong with him? Oh, he's brooding. I don't know. I mean, Socrates.
Yeah, so Socrates said, obviously, you should know the quote. So Socrates says, I know I'm smarter than everybody else because I know I don't know.
Well, whatever I know makes me aware of now what else I need to know. There's no finish point here.
Yeah, true. Thanks for the talk, Rich. I'm sure I'll talk to you again at some stage.
Yeah.
Good, thank you, Rick. Conrad, it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. What would need to happen for this to succeed more in society and government? Like what would you like? What things need to happen for your ideas to be implemented? For example, learnability, persuasion, usability.
Good question. I mean, rather than thinking of what would make them work, I think of where might I inseminate them? Like it doesn't necessarily. Some of these things will work in ways that do not require people to understand anything. It's just a question of seeing things from a different angle for a specific person in a particular place. Them seeing it that way starts to cause changes to unfold. So I don't have a plan of implementation in the sense of a program, but it does beckon the question of, well, what would you do with it? And I think part of the reason for resurrecting this side of it, rather than going just down the social renovation side, why would I want to go into the mess of these things? And the answer is because AI is coming along, and the problem with that, and here's something that's really poignant. This is a mind-boggling thought. I don't know if anyone's gone to Detroit recently. One of my sons went there, and he was aghast at just how decayed the city still was. The rich end was still there, but there's still, there's major scars. And Detroit collapsed because manufacturing went to China. Melbourne could be the next Detroit in Australia because its service sector is going to go to the Philippines and South Korea and similar time zone places, because I know we've already one initiative like this where they can have people working there at a third of the cost. Now, in some cases, the cost is low, but then they get the equivalent to make up the difference on share options, so that over time they become more and more valuable to the company. But still, by local standards, they're paid really well. But the interesting thing is, because of AI, there's some really interesting ways, and this analytic works into that. Like, if you know what forms the legal statement can take and what subsidiary stations could do and so on, then you can start rewriting insurance documents and constitutions and claim forms and so on, in a way faster, better, and more efficient than ever before. Admittedly, corporate players get in there and play games, but to give you an example, I did when my wife moved to Sydney, she was working in a super fund and they needed a website. And because I just finished this thing in Victoria, I said, I'll use this open source stuff, And so she said, where do I find those? Well, there's bound to be some guys in Sydney that can do it. So she found a group of young guys who did the Rabbitoh's website or something. Anyway, they said, could you do this simple website? Now, she designed it really carefully, and I'd gone through it to make it really neat. But anyway, they got the website up. It cost $50,000, done, and open source again. Anyway, by a series of accidents, we were over in MetLife, meeting people there, and they wanted to show their website. They spent $1 million on it, and it was nothing as good as the $50,000 one. So you think, well, wait a minute, there's something going wrong here. The players that come into this space monetize on the obfuscations, the delays, the aggro. They're not looking for a clean, lean solution. This formalization of commodities, legal relations, and social stresses tries to do that. And so what else can you do with a piece of law? I mean, if it's not any of these things, then it's a subsidiary comment to that, but it's going to be inside that cube somewhere. So the AI's got an advantage now, saying, oh, thanks, I've got a compass now. I can suck in all these documents, strip out the exception on the exception of the exemption of the this and the this and the update and blah, blah, and clean it down to something, tight. Now, law firms are getting into AI, and they're doing it completely the wrong way. It's really funny to watch them. They're going, go and do AI courses, and they want to replicate their writing style in the AI. Could you write a contract like I write a contract? The AI says, sure. Thinking, but then all the complaints, the confusions, the ambiguities, the court cases still unfold. And I'll get AI to fix that too. Meanwhile, if it's done from another place where people work hard and use the AI intelligently, it's going to be a big, big difference. And you're looking at it like, at least, take Manila, for example, you're looking at least 2,000 to 5,000 students that we taught and pissed off here by not teaching them properly. And they've gone back there and done MIT courses, repeat, open source courses, so they don't have to pay for them, but they've got the credential, and now they've got the actual understanding of how to do this stuff, and they're ready to roll. And so you get them involved, put an AI on top of them, and away they beaver with call centers and a lot. And I don't think we're anywhere near prepared for that. This thing is call to think, why can't we be the leader of this sort of thing? Now, admittedly, I'm partly to blame because I've been stuck in a whole set of urgencies and so on, but I'm hoping I can come out of this mire and share some of this stuff more widely. That's the best I can do.
Thank you, Conrad. Joe, go ahead.
One of the questions that I have, and the more I see the model, you can see the patterns in it. And one thing I was kind of wondering many times that I think about is to what degree is this most effective? In other words, scalability wise. And thinking about it, like how big of where would the boundary be that where you could apply this and the fidelity of the model actually was being able to be applied with some degree of integrity and not losing its value. So, I mean, and I'm going to throw something out here, and this may not make sense, but is it something along the lines, does it have to do with even drawing the boundary itself? What does that look like? Does it have to do with the number of people? Does it have to do with the literally geography? Things like that have an impact on how the model can actually be applied.
The best way there's a couple of things there. If you go down towards boundary setting and then the corpus of works that apply to the material inside that boundary, that's a big mountain of stuff, which, for example, AI or something has to then make sense of, and millions and billions of neural networks to sort of capture it. Think of it in a lean way. I don't know if any of you've heard, if any of you, you have to say yes or no to me, but anyway, if you've heard of liquid AI, which is an AI mode that's been modeled on a worm. They found a worm that has only 25 neurons or 30 neurons. It's a very small number of neurons. So it gets by. But they've learned to mimic it. And the thing about these neurons is that they're not yes, no, cascading binary things. It's as if they fill up with water. And when they reach a threshold of stress, they shoot off a signal. So each of these little things are filling and emptying depending on these thresholds. And they've worked out that this is very, very lean AI. So for want of a very small packet of thing, it can learn to do certain things and continues to learn, whereas AI has to be retrained if it starts having a failure rate. It doesn't learn on the fly. So this kind of thing, I think, leads to that sort of notion where you've got some basic grammatical atoms and they combine into certain molecules under certain things, and you can only go so far before the molecule breaks up. And you learn by the setting. And so rather than thinking of the boundary of the field, you think about the contours of an issue and what can you wrap around it with one of these three different things, staying inside this world. I mean, there's another world maybe as well, but inside the current global system, I think there are ways of having a lean AI and a data flow that's sticking inside a cube, basically, working out combinations.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the signaling is the important part there, right? So that's the interesting part to me, especially if you're talking in economic terms, like price signaling. And you're applying this model and then the integrity. Now you're talking about a system too. There's a lot of trade questions that you would actually have to address. These are self-sustaining systems I'm trying to think about. But I was just thinking about it in those terms, like if there was, like a limit to the model or an optimization of the model that can be applied and over, what would that necessarily look like? But you answered that very, very nicely for me. If I could ask one of a personal question, I remember, and don't answer it if you don't feel it's appropriate, but I remember you had two sons that were actually, one was in, I don't know if it was at Princeton doing startups or something like that, the last time you were here, if I remember.
There are two sons. One went to Princeton, and then various other places, then Fordham in New York, and then into corporate land, and now he's inventing something. I don't know what. He's sort of silent on what it is. But he's a classic mathematician. Like so
He's in innovation is the question, really what I was trying to get in.
well, he looks at mess and sees ineptitude. it's not. I see mess and I think there are people trying and getting tangled, but he just thinks, no, it's just they don't have a musical score. I'll just do it now. So sort of guy that wrote to the New York Transit Company or the bus company where it was, because of the way he saw the buses queuing at Grand Central Station. Worked out an optimization. I mean, crazy guy. That's it. Anyway, and the other one's here in Melbourne, and he's doing serious innovation in advertising. He's automating brand protection, so that
How would this model?
Sorry,
I'm sorry. How would this model then impact him? Is the real question? This is like I'm trying to see, because it's impacting innovation. So like if he were to kind of being impacted by this, and I know this is a very particular case and not something that could be extracted and be a universal, but nonetheless, it'd be an interesting, like.
If he saw this, if he saw this, he'd look at the middle one of deviance, because he would see his system as dissolving all of those F words.
Okay.
Like, because usually in advertising, you've got a brand that's got all these guidelines, 85 pages for Porsche, say, and then you've got a brand agency that wants to be imaginative and doesn't quite follow the guidelines. You've got to go check, is the angle of this to that exactly 44.4 degrees? What's the redness there? Is that actually the standard redness? And is it for print or is it for internet? And like what reds? There's a whole heap of hundreds like worldwide, hundreds of thousands of people just doing compliance on the ad. Whereas his thing can photograph an ad and disassemble it in terms of the pieces, and then look up the actual guidelines, ingest them, and then assess the ad, and then write off an email saying your ad on this street has got it's got a photo of a car, but the photograph has a garbage bin behind the car on the curbside, which is contrary to your guidelines. Shouldn't you be going for better? And people are like, what?
Right.
So he doesn't have to advertise. People just come out of the woodworks. Apparently, I don't follow them. I was a strong presence in their life when they were taking off, but now I'm a fair distance. I mean, they're flying on their own. They don't need.
That's perfect. That helps me a great deal. Is that it's a marketing company. What it would actually, how it maps onto this specific type of diagram is actually very helpful for me to think about it like a business case. And so that's what I was. I'm sorry. That's what I was.
Yes, I mean, I should be running workshops for consultants to use that deviance model on your ways into people's stress points.
Yeah.
Because they just measure stress as in like, this person's a bit afraid about their manager. They've obviously got a problem with, this and this and that. They anecdotally pick up the thing with their make-believe everyday psychology and things, and they think this will get us in. And then once we're in, we'll bring the software, and then we sort of slowly socialize everyone into the software. So it's dragooning people into yet another form of torment.
Right.
Whereas this thing actually marks out every single form of aggro in the interactions of your day job or your marriage or whatever, because it's not psychology, it's what you can do. And that's why Parsons' deviance thing is a breakthrough. I mean, there's very few people that have. I met him in 75, by the way. He's a short little man, a bit pompous, but wow, clever guy. And he wrote that, and unfortunately he psychologizes it himself. He keeps thinking with psychology, this is an interface with sociology. It's not. It's the sociology of deviance, and it's deviance, not deviant. It's the structure of the deviance, and so it's a realignment of just like you have a structure that's bent, you turn it around and get it straight again. Oh, now it's straight, fine, fixed. No need for introspection. It's an interesting. I find that very liberating, because I'm saturated by people that want to talk to me about their journey of self-discovery, which is understandable, but you know, there's only so much time left in life.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's where it's a balance between ethics and utility. So, yeah, thank you again.
Richard, could I suggest you stop share now?
Yep. And which do I do this? Where do I do that?
The red one is the stop share.
Oh, stop share. Right. Yeah. Sorry. Done.
Yes.
Oh, I can
Okay.
see everyone now. Oh,
Yes.
they're still here.
And George, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your presentation. If you don't mind, I want to push back on you a little bit because you said something in the Q&A about there's no bird's eye view. It's just mess. And the problem is that there are people that do seek to operate at the bird's eye view. Now, from your perspective, they're creating more mess, but they see intent design while you're sort of stuck in the muck, if you will. And so just going back to that Uber case, and Disney tried the same argument too. Now they backed down in that case. They withdrew that argument, but apparently, as you noted, aptly noted, it was successful in Uber. The point I'm driving at is that, you have political entities pushing to make the judiciary hostile to broad questions of fairness and justice, and indeed to serve corporate masters. So, I mean, that's my point to you that and I understand the tradition of sociology you're coming from. I come at it I try to engage it from the bird's eye view and try to understand basically why the system is sinking. So and I say this very respectfully, just to put this in perspective, in terms of my work, I try to see the forest. And the tradition you work from is you're trying to work at one tree at a time. My problem is that the forest is burning due to climate change, and you're working on the individual trees. So I don't know. Again, I'm just going to try to give you some pushback. I hope you find that.
Good. No, that's a good. You've jolted my mind on something here. Yes, it's a good irony here is John Anderson, this realist philosopher in Sydney, was manic about the issue of that we can only ever address issues. We can't. There's no notion of an overarching philosophical interpretation of the world. The world is not a container. So, and it's good for mounting critiques. He was very good at critiques, and most of his students, some of whom taught me, are really masterful at critique because they're sharp. They're sharp. As to the wider picture, which is from a sociological point of view, I do like the wider picture. But what I've found now, a good analogy, which I've only just recently started to think, I thought, well, to go to your point, the best example of bird's eye view is the celestial hierarchy of the angels, because you've got God is out of range from mind, but the cherubs at the top of that thing are the spinning light, and it goes down through a hierarchy down to earth, right? And then the Catholic Church, and then there's the Pope, and there's a hierarchy down to the parish even, and there's a priest that goes right down to the hierarchy of your little actions while you come to confession. So there's hierarchy for the grand vision. If you take that, imagine that as a sort of circular pyramid, and you squash it, so the thing that was at the top is now the central circle of a horizontal thing, and it's like a bat that sends out echoes out. And depending on the signal of the echo, it hits one of the rings and it comes back. So you're sort of landing somewhere. There are issues galore, but you go ping and you go and it comes back. It comes back and aha, over here, there's this kind of issue. So you can't leap out and think, well, what's the whole thing? Because that gets you into all sorts of problems about, oh, he's in the know, and then you get bullshit thrown at you, or it's just not. But this solves the problem the other way, which is to say, okay, it's a bit like going to the supermarket and not buying. It's just a bigger analogy of that is that you have essentially a curiosity that goes bing and it bounces out in a circular form, and then depending on the frequencies and so on, it comes back from a certain ring. And that way you get a feel for the complexities of what you're dealing. And as you turn it, you can do a survey. So you're still getting a fairly good sense of a picture. Like people seeing me in action can find, who would have thought to go that way? Like, who would have thought to go like that? You know, so there's a cunning about knowing how to navigate. It's not like you're in the mess and therefore, oh God, I'm in a mess like everyone else. I can't see. No, there's swell. And I occasionally come up and you go, ah, ha, ha, I saw that, and then I'll face it this time. Aha, got it again. It's a dynamic, momentary witness. It's theoria done through kairos. It's a moment of theory at the moment of time when the world reveals itself from that aspect. Now, ironically, John Anderson's great mentor, Samuel Alexander, who was a guy from St Kilda here in Melbourne. Well, he's born in Sydney, but he was educated in St Kilda, very bright fellow. The headmaster of his school here took him and himself to Oxford to see if he could get him into Oxford because he was Jewish. And he did, and he became a professor. And John Anderson was the closest student to this guy. And Alexander, by contrast, and to your point, he does have a super view. He has the notion of deity as that which is the completion of the universe. And he's got angels underneath that, and then he's got people, and underneath that he's got life forms, and underneath that there's molecular. And he goes all the way down to what he thinks of as space-time wobblies. So the physicists like him because he's got an emergent model of the universe. Theologian like him because he's got a view of God at the end of time rather than the beginning. And in the middle, he's a bit wishy-washy and Anderson's in the middle there. He's saying, oh, this is a bit too loose. So he pulls that bit out. But I'm sort of slowly bringing it back in and flattening it. So I've still got the sense of there's a way to bounce the signals off, to placate my ignorance and animate my curiosity, and then start thinking of what can I do next? Because I'm then going to feel the plight of other people. That's the other thing. It's like when you get a lineup and you think, oh, this is what's pissing everyone off, and they never knew. There are all these different reasons as to why it's no, that's what it is. And they go, what? You know, like that's really fun. I mean, you can really feel like an angel Gabriel when that happens because and just by the way, I didn't mention in the talk, those forms of deviance, I haven't developed this yet, but each of them are actually comedic forms. So instead of having the monk that retreats from the world, it's the monk that gets into the world and presents at the moment of a moment of time when, aha, we can all see this, and jokes about it. Because the joke of the chaos is memorable, whereas the chaos, what was that? Oh, forget it. If you catch the joke, and I've done that, my best example of that was sitting in this big room at the copyright agency, which I worked at for about 15 years in Sydney, and there's all these lawyers and people going on about exceptions and exemptions and all this stuff about copyright law, and it's so hard, and the lawyers have to be called all the time. We need to know about these cases, can't have librarians making decisions. And I said, just off the top of my head, I said, we're running the risk of sounding like we're a shanty town of ad hocery. And that phrase went through the organisation like in 5 hours. And the lawyers could never live it down. Needless to say, I wasn't very popular with them. But the thing was, it's that sort of moment that I think, now I'm conscious of it. I'm thinking, aha, I haven't developed this yet, but I'll probably I'd love to do a comedy show in that mode. I think that would be quite, not only under certain circumstances do I become comedic in a confident kind of way, but I'm intrigued with that because that would be an interesting anecdote that people could mimic. You think, oh, is that what? I see what he's doing. Here's the chart, right? Like the joke chart. You know, it's not to recite, but to construct new ones because it's a grammar of jokes. Maybe I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud off the top of my head in response to your comment. That way, I won't forget.
Thank you. I mean, I guess since we're using metaphors, and at least add another metaphor, which is that, I mean, and I'm going to use the word danger because we are in the crisis of global warming. We're looking at the rise of fascism, if not the embeddedness of fascism. We're looking at the possibility of nuclear war. And so, you know, I guess my only point would be, and not to disagree with anything you said, but that, you know, we very much run the risk of lining up the deck chairs in the perfect way on the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. And so as we're debating these deck chairs, and we're looking, oh yeah, it's still sinking, but look, let's get back to the deck chairs, that kind of thing. And so, that again, this is just to again push a metaphor. Thank you.
I mean, sorry to remind you, the talk I've given today is about what you can do inside the mire of now, right? It's not a strategy to get out of the mire. It's just to lessen some of the strictures of the mire and give people a sense of the mire, because they often hide it from themselves, right? So that's all it does, and exposes some of the trickeries and things that go beneath it. But the social renovation side would be akin, and this comes under a good example of that is in residential resilience. Instead of thinking about just a house or a building, you think about a parish, okay? And you think, okay, and you can do it. I mean, I'm a voyeur. I stand out there and watch how many delivery trucks come flying around, and the etiquette of how it gets delivered or not, and what's secure and what isn't, and so on. But anyway, the interesting thing is we've got really, really good logistics, highly mathematized, just in time, ready to pack, unpack, and assemble logistics, right? So it's a pipeline system. Something pops out in Shanghai, through a pipe, pops up at your door. You go, wow, 2 days, and I've got this amazing thing from Shanghai or Toronto or wherever. Now, what about the notion of a grapevine, not a pipeline? So, for example, my wife does a lot of cooking when she's not working because she likes to relax, and I don't mind her cooking. But anyway, she does a lot of cooking, and so she's got extra. So I keep saying, well, why don't we have a common fridge with locks, so that you can swipe and pull out a lasagna made by someone trusted on the next floor, and you swipe your membership card, so it's a club good, namely the building, and that will be deducted from your strata costs. So instead of paying, you're just doing all these transactions. Someone that does manicure, someone that does hairdressing. Now you can't do that in a building; that's too small. But you get to about 200 people, you're going to find that it turns out there are in this area easily 35 older guys who would, with a bit of prompting and support, become really good mentors for young people. Easy, I can see it, and they're sitting on Zoom instead. They could get 18-year-olds and really fire them up, and something I used to do all the time. So I find it quite poignant to watch young people meandering to the abyss. They don't even see what's happening to them. I mean, I nearly cry when I hear one guy, 20s, says, "Oh, you finished uni? Yeah, what was it like? Great, it was great. Great. We had a lot of fun, met lots of girls. What did you learn? Oh, got through it all. It wasn't too bad. Maths spooked me a bit, but I got on top of it. So what do you do now? I work for a bank. And what's that like? Oh, it's great. I'm learning so much." I'm thinking, what are you saying? What can you learn from language? I mean, that's a minuscule of what you could learn at uni. But he has got no concept. He thinks, the uni got me the network got the introduction, got into the bank, the other mates are there, same school, alumni, let's have a beer club. And they don't have equity, they don't have savings, they escapisms, etc. All like those deviance forms for them apply. That's tragic. Now, before I used to have control them, but I don't now. So it's a really interesting problem for me. And community-wise, you say, okay, what are we going to do about the young? Like, okay, let's line up. If you don't like it, don't. Go for the network. But some of you mightn't have a network, or you've been marginalized by the network. Take your revenge. Learn stuff that really makes you successful.
If I can just respond very quickly, quickly, and I appreciate all this. This is good. Thank you. But I do want to raise this on this point, which is, the broader question of people's alienation, the youth alienation. And again, I come back to the Uber example, right, where that kind of absurd argument has traction in our institutions, right? Yeah. And I think that makes people, forgive the pun, uber cynical, right? The idea is, why do I need to learn, when these institutions are so corrupt, they don't respond to reason, they're not enlightenment institutions, right? And, it gets people frustrated. And I think it creates something of the alienation to some degree in what you're talking about. Thank you.
That's a good point, and particularly with, well, it's both young men and young women. There's all sorts of issues, but there are all sorts of ways to counter it too. I mean, it's not impossible, because if you combine the dare, like they'll go for a dare, sneak into this place and see if you can do this, you know, and then they do it. You say, fine, watch this, and you show them how. You know, a good example of that would be someone that she plagiarized her essay. God, this database stuff. How could you possibly plagiarize? Anyway, and she was upset and distressed. And I said, look, this is ridiculous. We're going to pretend you never sent this into me, because that's just not on. Academics make a real fetish. Oh, you plagiarized, child molester, you know. No, that never happened. Okay, and she'd been overworked by her husband. He wants to cooking, and she's trying. Anyway, I said, okay, look, I'll get you a job at this other place. Just menial job. It's just entering data into a spreadsheet. I talked to a guy who's a student as well. I said, look, she's a bit frazzled, but get her into a job and give her a task that you'd find useful. So he said, okay, well, enter all this data and do a little tabulation. So she's getting paid and doing this thing. I give her an extension of 3 weeks. So she gets 3 weeks worth of wages and comes in with this report about the spending habits between Europeans and Japanese in Tasmania. And no one had done this cross-tabulation, that the Europeans stay for 2 to 3 weeks and travel the entire state and go from milk bar to this to that, spread their money wide. The Japanese come by wholesalers into the hotel, 3 days intensive, guided bus tour, merchandise stuff that's coming from Japan and being sold here. I mean, money goes back there. So the yield per tourist was like 5 times higher for the European than the Japanese. She pulled that off. The CEO says, why wasn't I shown this? Who made this? Like, that girl. And that did it. Like, that just did it. And there's lots and lots of little things like that you can find. We may not think about doing that. I mean, it's a bit ingrained with me because I've got a pedagogical background. And in Tassie, you're like thinking, shit, if you don't you got to get out of here. So a lot of them were thinking, I'm in jail here. What can you do for me? It's like, get you to Melbourne, get you to San Francisco, somewhere. So they had to work hard, but they could see this is going to take off. And some of them were skeptical. Well, go talk to the person in Los Angeles now. Ask them what it's like. They were from Hobart. So I'm more confident about that. I know there's pervasive resignation, etc. But my problem is, how would I propagate, in the sense of a contagion, some of this practice? And I haven't described it well enough for someone like anyone here watching, saying, shit, count me in. I'll try that. Can you coach me? You know, I'm not at that stage yet, but I could get to that stage within a year. And then the multiplication of that is exponential, not because it's intrinsically rewarding to both parties. You know, so
Thank you very much.
Richard, for your information, the Alexander Theatre at Monash University is named after Samuel Alexander.
That's right.
Yes. Stephen, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for your illustrative talk. I'm a bit curious about something and how this would be modelled, because it does seem to be a freeway situation. I had a friend who was going through the academic system, university, and of course, being a young student, they were convinced that the way to get ahead was to be a great talent in their respective fields. So they worked very hard. They did have a sort of a natural talent, and they expected that was going to give them, that alone would get them the rewards, that the world would recognise them for their talent. But you notice that's not the way it works. To get ahead in the university, in the academic world, there's another sphere. It's called politics. And they were losing out on the politics. And I sort of started to explain that to them after a while. And they were endlessly in denial, saying, oh, no, politics is evil. It shouldn't be there. But I said, it is there, no matter what you think of it. And I said, well, another factor, of course, is just simple luck, that And luck, you could use the word opportunity in another sphere, and you could say, well, there's the opportune moment, and that can be lucky, although if you wait for it, you just might find the opportune moment. And they said, oh, luck should have nothing to do with it. I should be recognized alone for my talents. I kept on telling them, it's just not the way the world works. I mean, they're immensely more intelligent than me, but yet there's that sort of IQ problem that sometimes a person with a high IQ just doesn't see the realities.
Yeah, I mean,
Wondering what you think about that.
No, well, first of all, academic institutions in Australia, well, about the 80s, have deteriorated rapidly. On the supply side, there's all this money to be made on Chinese, Indian, Bangladesh students. And so the money's poured in, and all these corporate types run the university, create huge buildings, sell out consulting services. The students are just fodder. Unfortunately for Australia, there's like 20,000 Chinese students who are seriously pissed off with how they were treated. Because the parents say, I'll go to Australia and I want to go to Princeton. Or I want to... No, Australia's in the same time zone, so you can talk to me before dinner. Oh, okay, mum, come out here and, marginalized, there's in-group. They beaver away, they prepare everything, reference everything. Oh, yeah, credit plus, unless they're particularly good. Oh, clever Chinese person. No engagement as to what vision or anything. Now, and they're sitting in lower middle class farming or service sector, daughter of a real estate agent in Guangzhou, say. And they think, well, there's more to it than that, surely. So they get the credential, but once you find them and say, look, how about you try this? And you get them involved in dealing with services to Australia, it turns out they're nous about all the games Australians play to mark out in-group, out-group, because we don't play status. We play in-out. There's a slightly different logic. But the thing is, you can learn to mimic how to sound like you're in-group. I was talking to so-and-so the other day, and he was saying that same thing as you said, just said, oh, you know him, do you? Like, as soon as you do that, like you got Chinese people who do not have our interests at heart. So, and I've watched this, like it's a guy walking around, buying up property, getting into it, like the car parks, the private car parks in CBD Sydney is a family in Taipei. They can sit on their app in Taipei in a restaurant, watching the money flowing into their account by the minute. I mean, like, why is that money going there? Couldn't we not, whereas, a uni could say to people like, if you've got parents with money, how about, you build it locally, you become the manager, like get it localized.
That's a
but
fascinating
we don't give
trade.
a shit.
We took the wind turbines and they took the car parks. Who's going to get richer?
But the problem is that's on the supply side, but on the demand side, the supply, there's the academics. And I came in this way, was the Margaret Thatcher refugees from England were all social science, postmodern, that kind of, she loathed sociology. And so when I came back, I was lucky I had a much stronger strand, even in Cambridge. So there's this little subgroup there that kind of nurtured it. But the rest of them, they come out here. They're vice chancellors now, and they've all got publications, and all they've done is demand deference. Oh, your footnotes aren't done right. Surely, if you're going to give a talk about this, how can you mention Heidegger without at least an acknowledgement of Derrida's commentary, blah, blah, blah? Or, walking down the street in Hobart talking about Baudrillard, and someone says, how do you spell that? or having fun about someone thinking, I haven't read Socrates. No, it's Socrates. I mean, this is not designed to create an elite that's a vanguard for the nation's future. It's not. I mean, there's bits that come together, but it's taken. I've had to find and fumble around in the margins of the society to get people, and then they're fired up. And of course, once they're fired up, they're seriously fired up because they don't have privilege. So they think, oh, wow, okay. I have had some of privilege, but they're often the other way around. They use the sociology to get away from the parents so they can just do their own thing, which is not necessarily a leadership role that they could have had.
Two motives one is status and the other is money.
Yeah, that's right.
What about power? Would that come into it as well?
Well, the power side of it is simply a good example is the core. I was generating, in terms of enrollments I was personally doing in TasUni, I was generating enough income to supply 3 or 4 lectureships, right? And so I was a lecturer, and I was doing 4 times my own salary, and I wasn't doing research because I was committed to. I'd say, look, writing on the soul of a person is way more interesting on a piece of paper, which is coming back to bite me now, just by the way. So it's not, I'm not being holier than thou. But anyway, so I'd do that sort of level of thinking. And it was all data-based, practical. The intellectual stuff came after they themselves had issues that were bigger than just the usual humdrum stuff. Then you could talk some theory. Then I'd say, oh, this bit of Marx is what you need now. They'd read 5 pages. Oh, is that what Marx sounds like? Well, then read a bit more. So keep it steady. You know, you can't just force feed the full gamut of the heritage in 6 weeks. And so they'd get better and smarter and so on. The problem with the colleagues, though, where they're all postmodern type refugees from Margaret Thatcher, they loathe this because they're wanting to just have quote and talk. And so in the end, it blew up. I mean, they wanted to close down the courses midstream, so the students wanted to go to the ACCC to sort of say, you know, breach of contract because people are taking retirement, you know, redundancies to do this course for a new career, all shut down. So
I was wondering about the university hierarchy.
So this gets up to the vice chancellor level. So then think, oh, we can't just shut down. We have to do a review of the department. So they got all these professors from around Australia come and look at it and said, oh, wow, this guy's cool. The other guys who had enrolled 80 PhD students, of which 4 had finished, 1 had suicide and 2 had been, you know, into personality issues, a complete waste of taxpayer subsidy. Whereas mine were not subsidised and were making money for the government in tax the year later, right? So, oh, but that's just technical stuff. It should be in a technical college. No, it's not. I mean, some of them go on to do PhDs anyway at other universities, but the problem here is the culture is very much about in-group, out-group, and then whether you've got hearsay from the Queen, that kind of notion. So in Cambridge, a joke that used to play, that fellows would play at high tea. I mean, times like that, I'd pretend to be Italian. I go, Riccardo, you know. Anyway, but that's, you know, they have the Australian guys there and they say, oh, it's time to pass the port. And of course, the etiquette is to pick up the port and ask the provost or whatever is the head there, which way do I do it? And you get 2 reactions by Australians. They'll say, one of them, the larrikin, will come out and say, oh, yeah, should I send it around with a straw? Does anyone need straws? You know, go that way. And that was a bit of cheap fun, but it was, you know, the larrikin Australian. The Englishmen like that for a bit of after dinner chatter. Or earnest, like, oh, I guess I have to, since it's the porter, the head guy's there, I better serve him first, but it's actually last, so you can go left and go around. And I think you should go that way. And I used to joke saying, like, Australians either have a brown nose or a brown arm. Either they're shit stirring or ass licking, and that's it. You know, like at the level of intelligentsia, that's the mode. Like the media loves the ass, you know, the shit stirrer, and the academia likes the ass licker. And so it's a very sad situation. But
satire is just another element of skepticism, isn't it? People who are very satirical are skeptical. So you're saying a lot of Australians are very skeptical.
Well, I don't know. I think it's only at the level of when on the boundary. Like if you're just Australians as like students, teaching students Australian, Israeli, American, Italian, English, Australians are by far the best. And it goes back to Gallipoli, because if you have a group and they've just got themselves and nothing else, go make something happen, right? So Americans are going to think, well, who's in charge? Like, what do we say? What's the framework? What are the options? You know, like, we need to know, like, not going to meander here. Like, give us the line. Italians think, well, let's just have some fun, and then it doesn't matter what happens. Israelis will think, well, you know, it's kind of okay to do this, but then it'll be one-upmanship who can make more fun of the thing. You know, so there's different micro dynamics that are different. But the Australians, they could invent things. They could do stuff. People built businesses out of it. I'm speech, like, I'm in awe of what Australians do when they're in a group and they're cut off because they don't have a super ego. There's no voice of the parents, like, or the voice of, you know, like in England, as Nietzsche used to say, the premature aging of the young. They're all the voice of the family. You know, like in Australia, it's just put it together. And we used to run multi-day simulations, and it was amazing. 60 people. All kinds of
a short one
discoveries.
in a sentence where you can answer it. What do you think of Plato?
Plato is inspiring. I mean, Plato's. I mean, it's a
Okay,
trick
we've got
question.
inspiring. Any bad ones on Plato?
Well, the thing that's bad about Plato or unhelpful is that is the way he etherealizes the forms. They float, you know. Whereas Aristotle goes the other way. The forms are more like little DNA that wriggle into the organism and take over how it reproduces itself. The energia, as he called them.
Oh, well,
lead to
according
the,
to Plato, you can't find perfection in the world.
No, but the point of the exercise is to seek perfection. You're not going to find it. No, you want to seek it. And you find it in the syntax of things, maybe. You find it on, like, you know, you can have a concept of a triangle. You're never going to find the perfect triangle. So, but triangularity is worth looking for if you're trying to look for a certain kind of furniture or.
Anyway, Richard, I think we'd better give the next person a chance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Jana, your turn. Go ahead, Jana.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, I don't want to make any comments except I sent the message to George and I want him to read it. That's all what I would like to say. But I'm grateful for presentation and discussion.
So what's your background?
Mine?
Yeah.
In which way?
Any way you think is salient.
I'm a physician.
A physician?
Yeah, I'm very intellectual and I appreciate this discussion very much.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I crave people like you, but especially I admire by your politeness. It's like unbeatable. It's
My
like,
politeness.
yeah, all group actually politeness. Yeah, like
Yeah,
the
that's
tone of
better.
voice, very soothing. I'm from the US. I live in California, and I don't think we have it here. Like it's everything like a little edgy here, but it's not my first time that I'm joining your group, and it's one of those reasons why actually I joined this group.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because the way how you express yourself without raising voices, without using certain words. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Well, I mean, yeah.
So I'm grateful to all group and you
It's a good, I mean,
specifically.
from my perspective, it's a good group because, as I said at the beginning, it's a like in sociology, there's a distinction between generalized other versus significant others. So none of you are, or one or two or three of you might be significant others to me personally, but the bulk is like a generalized other. So it's a frame of shape up, Richard, show your stuff, and tell it as it is. Who, me? Now I've got too many. You know, that's what this group causes me to go through. And then I start trying to write it and think it and so on. And then I discover all these loose ends that I've had hidden because I can't sustain the stress of too many intellectual contradictions. So I squash them. But when I give presentations, I think, okay, it's time to throw it out and see. And I've found a couple as we've been speaking, and some of you have spotted a few as well. So thank you for that. But thank you anyway, generally, because it's like going through a roller, like after being in a washing machine, like, and all the wrinkles get thrown out of me. So it's quite therapeutic for me. Anyway.
Do you mean presentation itself or preparation for presentation?
No, the presentation for the group, like the
Oh,
groups
it doesn't
hovering
feel
around.
this way at all.
Yeah,
It feels very smooth and very pleasant.
well, yeah, but that's because I've had to deal with the gremlins before turning up. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'll over energize because I'm having to make sure I've got a mission or a nuance of a mission that I'm helping to clarify. And if I don't do that, it's very distressing because I think, yeah, I mean, for me, this is a new phase for me because I will eventually, at some, next, probably this year, in a few months' time, start a group of my own where I go through all of these things with much more detail and worksheets and so on. I'm not. I don't have any pretend. I don't like. I like to see the stuff go out. I'm not possessive or, oh, don't quote me or, I don't. And I don't write that much, except for very specific settings. Like, I mean, I've written obituaries. But some of my best writing are obituaries because, I saw someone try great things and then misfortune happened and no one knows quite what it was like to climb that hill. So I make that poignant and alive and so on. But as a sub issue, this group, this session, I think gives me enough of confidence, or is it gall, try a comedic rendition of those deviance forms. I think that will be fun to try. Because if I can get that, I could mimic that. I could do stand up or something, and people think, "Oh, how's that work?" Like it's a different. It's not. And just by the way, Hegel on comedy is really, really quite illuminating when you're reading from the perspective of these deviance forms. Only discovered in the last 2 weeks. Such was my desperation for coherence. I read Hegel. Anyway,
maybe you can one day to do presentation in a form of a stand out the comedian.
Maybe.
As you said.
I'm.
It's the best way to deliver the truth.
Yeah, sure.
Through humor.
Yeah.
Like touchy topics, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I do comedic things, but in the university setting, if too much laughter is coming out of a lecture theatre, that does not bode well for you. Like it's, you can't have that sort of thing. So, but in any case, now at my age, I think I can try something in that direction where the joke carries further than the joker. The joker fades out. Like maybe I have not ever done that, so I'm just thinking aloud here. Prompt.
Yeah, I just want to. Yeah, I don't know if George left when I was saying that I left him a message in a chat,
right?
And maybe he can read it. Right. George, could you confirm that you hear me, please?
Let's see. Any George?
Is he here?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Left.
okay. All right, I will just mute myself. No, he's here. George Gonzalez, but he's muted. Oh, we have two George Gonzalez.
Okay.
Is it the same person or different person?
I don't know.
It says George Gonzalez and George Gonzalez.
You could send the message to David Miller. He's in contact with me. So.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't want to take more time from the group. Thank you.
Oh, good talking.
Well, thank you, Jana, for your comments.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah, true pleasure.